This might be relatable to those of you who grew up in suburban areas with a sizable Asian American population. But have you ever seen those shopping complexes with stores that have signs written in Chinese or Korean characters that are filled with Asian restaurants or businesses and are usually centered around an Asian supermarket, like an H Mart or a 99 Ranch? You might see some elderly folks buying vegetables or reading the newspaper, young people getting boba or visiting karaoke houses, families getting lunch after sending their little kids to get tutored. Let's call them Asian malls. Hi, I'm Sophia.
And I'm Claire.
And today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the unique political and historical contexts surrounding the establishment and survival of these Asian malls and their significance to the local communities, where sometimes these are the only places where Asian American residents can feel like they are truly themselves. In Mainstreaming the Asian Mall, Chapter 3 of her 2017 book Trespassers, Asian Americans and the Battle for Suburbia, University of Maryland Urban Studies and Planning professor Willow Lung-Amam speaks about the sociocultural implications and political discourse surrounding Asian malls in Fremont, California. She notes that the Asian malls function similarly to Chinatowns in other urban ethnic enclaves, but they're more adapted to a suburban context. For example, Asian malls tend to cater towards the more upscale, middle to upper middle class clientele of suburbia, or at least that's the feeling associated with them. Traditionally in the US, Asian ethnic enclaves like Chinatown or Little India were largely situated in cities in the 1950s and 60s. So, what predicated the move of Asian Americans en masse from the cities to the suburbs? To answer that question, we'll have to talk a little bit more about the history of Asian American immigration to the US pre-Cold War. You might have learned from APUSH or another US history class that the earliest Asian migrants in the 1800s were mostly low-wage laborers. Some notable populations include Filipino and Japanese migrants working on plantations in Hawaii, and the Chinese migrants who built railroads on the west coast of the continental US. A lot of these migrants formed and settled in ethnic enclaves within major US cities for safety and solidarity, where co-ethnic businesses and services naturally arose to satisfy the needs of the community. Unfortunately, Asian immigrants faced nativist opposition from the public and the US government during this time. In the late 19th century, the government passed several exclusionary laws, such as the 1875 Page Act or the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned entire groups of Chinese migrants from entering the country altogether. This period of systemic exclusion would continue all the way until the end of World War II. During the exclusion era, most of the existing Chinese American population in the US congregated in urban Chinatowns, where many turned to self-employment due to the restrictions on labor opportunities. The landscape of Asian immigration to the US really only shifted majorly when these immigration bans were lifted in the mid-20th century, such as with the 1965 Immigration Act. The combination of these changing immigration policies, the economic demand for both high and low-wage labor that arose during these decades, and pressures such as the Korean and Vietnam War caused a huge influx of immigration from East, Southeast, and South Asia during the 1960s and 70s. While many of these new immigrants had low levels of education and took low-wage jobs in the US, there was also now a sizable portion of highly educated professionals among Asian immigrants. The 1960s was also around the time Asian Americans began settling in the suburbs en masse. According to Wen Li's 1999 paper on ethnoburbs, on one hand, we see Asian Americans who are living in the cities now moving to the suburbs for better housing. And on the other hand, we have highly skilled immigrants from Asia settling directly into the suburbs without living in the cities first. In a 2017 article, Becky M. Nicolaides posits that Asian Americans were racialized as the model minority during the 1960s, which allowed them to gain entry into the white-dominated suburban spaces. While some Asian Americans would disperse and assimilate into such white dominated suburban communities, there was also a rise in the formation of ethnoburbs, which are defined by Wen Li as suburban ethnic clusters of residential areas and business districts. We now see ethnoburbs of Asian American populations arise in places such as East San Gabriel Valley and Fremont, California, in Austin, Texas, in Northern Virginia, and Flushing, New York, just to name a few places. Naturally, as more and more Asian American immigrants or otherwise settle into the ethnoburbs, there will be an increase in Asian American businesses that cater to the specific needs of the residents in these areas. And that, in short, is how we get Asian malls open up in response to the demand for Asian services.
Well, no, not exactly. While a lot of American malls are centered around a major retailer clothing brand such as H&M or Macy's or Nordstrom or whatever, most Asian malls are anchored by an Asian supermarket. We actually had the privilege of asking Dr. Lung-Amam why she thought this was the case, and well, she said, and I'm paraphrasing, well, if you think about it, food is just such a big, integral part of Asian culture. So isn't it only natural that we prioritize food as a centerpiece of our institutions? And honestly, that's so true. I remember when I was a kid, we would go to a local Asian supermarket, and in the front of that supermarket, there was a very old Chinese lady that gave dumpling samples. And I remember when my parents go shopping, they would leave me with the dumpling sample lady, and we would talk for about half an hour to an hour. And despite the language gap, she would feed me dumpling after dumpling after dumpling. And it's just a big reminder to me on how food is just such a big part of our society because of its amazing ability to bridge language and generational gaps. For a lot of Asian Americans, Asian malls are a sort of sanctuary. For immigrants, Asian malls become a place filled with food and ideas and cultures that they already understand. For Asian Americans that grew up in America, it becomes a place that helps us ground our identity and affirm our Asianness. It helps us connect to our culture without having to go back to our homeland. However, Asian malls are often a point of conflict due to their lack of inclusivity, such as their use of Mandarin signs or being geared towards Asian American audiences. This plays into the long-standing perception of otherness that permeates throughout Asian America. In the late 19th century, there was a big influx of Chinese migrant workers to the United States. This influx fanned the flames of the anti-Asian sentiment, and Asian workers were often labeled as unable to assimilate, inferior and immoral, and unfairly competing for white worker jobs. In today's world, it might seem like our society is a lot more welcoming towards Asians. However, this anti-Asian sentiment is still lurking. And this can be seen in the March 16th Atlanta shootings or all of the Asian hate crimes during the pandemic. The anti-Asian sentiment also manifests in microaggressions against Asian malls. In Fremont, for example, there has been an urge to have more white tablecloth restaurants or upscale supermarkets, such as Whole Foods. Asian malls are often seen as lower class, inferior, an intrusion, or a barrier to improving the city. Oftentimes, getting the approval to construct more Asian establishments or businesses gets stalled or denied for this very reason by city officials, despite the high demand within a high Asian American population community. More outrageously, city officials often use Asian malls as a diversity token, as a boasting point for their city, despite their opposition to constructing more businesses. So to further explore perceptions within culture in different cities, we interviewed a few of our friends to hear what they have to say in regards to Asian malls. First of all, how do you identify in terms of like your ethnicity and your generation?
I am a Filipino American and I am a first generation.
I am Taiwanese, 1.5, depending on what definition you go by.
I'm just white. My parents, I think it's at least great grandparents that immigrated here. So it was a while ago, very much American.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm Chinese. And I guess second generation because like my parents immigrated here and I was born here.
Well, I identify as Chinese. Both my parents are Chinese. They immigrated from China in the 90s.
How far away is your nearest Asian mall?
I think the largest one, what most people think of when they're going to like, I guess what would be considered an Asian mall is in University City.
Mhm.
There's the nice part of U City, which is a lot of like wealthy homes. And then the second half is the lower income. And that's what a lot of people call like the Chinatown of St. Louis. So that's probably the closest one to me and where I used to frequent more often. That's probably like 10, 15 minutes from my house. And then there's a much nicer one in more of a white area. It's kind of like a hidden gem. It's a larger place with a little bit more diversity as far as Asian products go.
I live in Sudbury, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston. I think that there aren't, so my town is not that diverse, but maybe the closest Asian grocery store or Asian mall is maybe 30 minutes away.
If I compare between like where I currently live, so I'm living in Mountain View right now. This is like more of your Silicon Valley feeling place. It's like a lot of people who are here for their work, not necessarily like more Asian, but you can definitely notice a significant difference when you make your way into Fremont or like the neighboring cities like Milpitas, because you see a lot more of these like establishments like you described, like the Asian malls. Like you come off the freeway and then half a block you get a 99 Ranch.
We have like a small one like 15 minutes away, but then like if you go like 30 minutes, there's like like one of those like plazas or like malls like full of like different Asian stores.
Do you go to a lot of these like so-called Asian malls? Do you frequent them?
Oh yeah. Oh
Is it,
yeah.
like,
Twice a month. One of the reasons we don't go that often is just because of the distance. And each time we go, we usually buy Asian vegetables.
Yeah.
And stuff like staples like noodles and stuff. So we buy those in bulk or however long they would last in the fridge.
When you go, how do you feel like it connects to your identity? Does it make you feel more connected, or do you feel like ambivalent? And does it help you connect to your culture more?
I think, well, it has been a big part of my childhood, and I guess that's part of my identity because I've always remembered going to Asian grocery stores and seeing the interior. It does help me connect to my culture. I think having the food around or being able to cook traditional dishes with my family is very important. Like, for example, when my grandparents come to visit from China, we would always cook traditional dishes that they're used to cooking.
When I go into like those Asian stores, like I just like reminded of like going to buy like food with my parents. Just like, yeah, just memories of it, but like I feel like it's not the actual store itself that makes me like feel more Chinese.
Yeah, I think so. I think because I don't have a lot of Asian friends, and it's mostly just the way I identify with my culture is a lot through food. And most of the things that I cook as not stuff I can find in a conventional grocery store. So I think the easiest way to identify with my culture is through food. So it does involve a lot of going to these places.
I think these places definitely do help me connect to my culture. One big thing I still like practice of my culture after like living in the States for so long is the food. Whether if it is like just making the food or sharing the food that I'm familiar with from my culture, that it's not possible unless like I have somewhere to source these ingredients or like go to a restaurant where it sells that.
Do you ever feel like Asian malls or the presence of having a lot of Asian businesses overshadow businesses from people of other ethnicities?
Yes, I do. I think in that area, it is a lower income area, and there are some other like their businesses as well. Like there's a few African businesses, a few Jamaican businesses in that same area, but when people think of that area, they call it the Chinatown, you know, and they just think of it predominantly, it's just going to be Asian culture in that area.
These like really large presences of H Mart and 99 Ranch and 168 or something like that, it would kind of overtake the allotment of Asian geared establishments in the area, and because they are popular and like kind of the incumbent, you know, token diversity, it kind of just stays.
No, I don't think that at all. I mean, I don't visit Boston that often, but I feel like there's a good balance between, I think, well, Asian businesses and other types of businesses.
Well, how do you feel about the statement that Asian malls are exclusionary to other cultures?
Yeah, especially the one that I grew up going to, because most of the things are only written in Chinese. It's not really inclusionary to a lot of the other Asian ethnicities. I know it's not super common or in the St. Louis area. There's not like a huge Filipino population already. So I just have to make do with what I got.
Maybe it's just exclusionary because of the language barrier, mostly. I think exclusionary might be too strong of a term, actually, so I take that back. Maybe just something that doesn't draw other races towards.
Okay, like not inviting, maybe.
shop. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a common thing for white people is not wanting to feel like you're like intruding on a space that's for like people who are minorities, or like even just feeling like, oh, if I go, they're gonna feel like they have to like educate me and I'm like ignorant stuff, and so you're kind of just like, I'll just like go to Wegmans or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like it's not like exclusionary because also like those malls are like for like more like specific products, like those Asians are like Asian foods that you can't really get at a like normal grocery store.
Is going
Like,
to
what-
Bath and Body Works like exclusionary clothing. Like
Yeah,
like it's kind of for a specific thing. So you should be going there because you want to go there, not like expecting something that's not there, you know?
yeah, that's kind of different from like whether like other people like feel welcome in like the stores, but I feel like the stores itself is not like trying to be like exclusive to only like certain ethnicities.
Have you seen these Asian malls being play any role in like politics in terms of like trying to get more young Asian voters, or like the diversity token thing I mentioned earlier?
Yes, not specifically at the sites that I've talked about, like Fremont or Southern California before. I have like noticed that some politicians like to hold events at these malls, right? Because they see that this is an opportunity to reach out to my constituents. But like you said before, it's like it serves a small subsection of like all of the Asians in a particular community. If this is a politician trying to get Asian American votes.
A little bit there would be because like I seen like ads like posted on like bulletin board of those stores and like flyers.
Not in my experience.
No, I haven't seen that happening I haven't seen that linked to any Asian stores or anything like that.
Lastly, do you feel like going to Asian malls makes you feel like you can understand? Does it open doors for you to understand cultures better, or like increase your diversity understanding, anything like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that especially my family is pretty closed off to other Asian cultures. It's always just been there are Filipino people and then there are white people, and everyone else in between doesn't exist. So I feel like I have to delve into that myself. And I think those kind of communities make that a lot easier, you know, that cater to other cultures other than my own.
For me, like a big part of it is kind of having a friend to introduce me to it. So like I would never necessarily go to an Asian mall by myself, but like likes to cook a lot of Asian food. Amy cooks some Asian food. So like having someone to introduce you to the foods kind of makes it more fun. And like, yeah, I guess I like that aspect of it, like being able to try different foods.
Yeah, like a little bit more, because if you're just like walking around the store, you see like specific sections like of like other ethnicity, and like you could kind of like look at the food and like take an interest in more. Like you could if you see something that looks really good, you may like look up recipes and kind of learn how to like make those things.
So as you can see, the perceptions and experiences at Asian Mall vary by ethnicity and location in the United States. Our interviews showed a few things that rang true from our readings, that Asian malls are a point of connection to culture, and food plays a tremendous role in bridging generational and cultural gaps. It is also of note that in locations with higher Asian American populations, Asian malls are more commonly used as a vehicle for politics, such as in California. In the future, it would be great to continue exploring the role politics plays in the development of Asian malls, perhaps by interviewing or discussing with city building developers like what Lung-Amam did. For now, we hope that you enjoyed our exploration in ethnoburbs and Asian malls as much as we enjoyed discussing it.
I am Taiwanese, and I guess generation-wise count as a Gen Z.
I meant like generation.
Yeah. Tony's goods. If I don't see Tony's goods, I'm like, yes, this is not for me. This is like, yes, it's kind of for me, but this is not exactly for me.
What's Tony's goods?
It's like brands that I recognize, or I like look on the back of it, the barcode, if it starts with 471, that's how you know.
Cluster of what people would think are. That's what I meant.